How do I see this?
Probably
Maybe
one.
if I go to analytics.
There are 4 people watching.
Yeah, it's probably us.
And
Oh,
one,
four people watching. Okay, gotcha.
yeah, 5.
5. Look at that. They're trickling in.
Yeah,
Um, cool. Well, as in last time, I'm imagining we'll have to vamp a bit before the questions truly come
yeah.
in. But in exciting news, so this is not kind of the official announcement because we still have a lot of work to do on the different packages and things like that. But the 3.0 release candidates are sort of on their way out. So we'll be announcing it sort of officially next week. Um, but uh, if you're watching super closely on our hex packages, you might see some exciting things happening there. So, um, hey Ricardo, good to see you. Ricardo's been doing lots of great pull requests to Ash GraphQL, a couple of our other packages. He's really doing cool stuff. Yeah. So, do you guys have any updates that you want to share?
Still working on the subscriptions. Right now I have a pull request open on Absinthe itself, but it seems like Ben got COVID a week ago or something.
Oof.
So still waiting, yeah, on a reply there. Yeah, looking forward to finishing that off.
Cool.
I don't really have any updates. My company is getting ready to go to market, so I'm
Mm,
pulling long days every day on our product. I haven't had a lot of time to get in there and do Ash PRs.
yeah.
So been a quiet month for me. Although I'm working in Ash every day, that's all I do at this point. I'm not really contributing to the project over the last few weeks as I've been trying to put the polish on our product and start getting it out the door. So
I mean, I
Really,
definitely think the best thing anyone can do for Ash is to build successful things with it, right? Like more than PRs, more than anything is to like have a success story, release things out in the wild that's like that we can point to, that sort of thing. So I'm definitely excited about that, and I don't think it's I don't think it's something to worry about. I'd rather you ship something real and make money with it than make a PR.
that's the goal. And I'll when it gets a little further along and we're actually in market, I may demo some of the product and how we built it because there's a lot of interesting how did you do that with Ash parts of the product because it's a pretty large product.
Very, very cool. Um, okay. So folks in the live stream can let us know if you have any issues hearing or anything like that. I can adjust audio levels. It seems like we should be okay. But we've got a couple people watching now, so I would say, let's bring in the questions. Um, uh, if you have any, Barnabas and Robert, if you guys can watch, or just one of you really can watch the Discord for questions, because I'm
mhm,
like locked to this window since that's what I'm streaming.
yeah. Will do.
Um, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah, I'll
Hey,
be checking the general channel and the YouTube chat.
perfect, perfect, perfect. Um, all right. Well, we still don't have any questions, and I don't necessarily want to leave it up to dead air, but people drop them in if you can. But we could talk maybe
I,
about. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'll cue you up with the first question. Now that we've got the 3.0 branch for Ash uh, uh, up and running, what is the strategy for going through all the packages and the community packages that also need to upgrade to 3.0 before a really large app can kind of start to move? Obviously, most apps use multiple Ash packages. So just having the main one core on 3.0 it doesn't doesn't mean that any one app can migrate. Can you talk about the strategy for migrating the community packages and the non-core packages?
Yeah, I mean, for the community packages, there's really nothing we can do. It's going to be left up to the people who run those packages. What we've found is, especially for smaller packages, upgrading is quite simple. Like if what you do is expose like an ash dot type and some helpers or changes, those things haven't really meaningfully changed. And so I think it's not going to be too complicated um, of a migration, but I can't do it for them, and so it's really just going to have to be kind of when they can. But for core packages, we're going to update all of them, right? I've gone through. We've got a tracking issue on GitHub where I've listed known core packages as well as known community packages. So these are things that I could find on Hex. But I'll share it here. But we've got Ash authentication is actually done, and Ash smokestack and what was it? Ash CubDB is also done. So we're gonna do all of these basically next. So it should be soon. And then for the known community packages, we're just gonna, we're hoping that I guess people who use these will ping the people who made those and kind of figure it out from there.
Great.
Then we have a question on Discord. I think you want to improve the dev experience after releasing 3.0. Does this simply imply anything other than the docs? Better, more compilation errors, maybe?
Yeah, so the primary, or the first, not necessarily primary, but the first effort is going to be docs. However, following up from that, it's basically like I am going to be freed up a lot more to, like, when you have low bandwidth, it's hard to, like, somebody comes to you and they're like, this error is really bad, and it's like, yeah, that is really bad, but I've got like 90 other things on my plate trying to get these things out, and so I don't, ultimately those have to be prioritized lower. And so what we're really going to be doing is like taking a lens of prioritizing developer experience higher than like new, not necessarily higher than new feature development, but we've got the core feature set that we want, and now it's a lot of refinement before moving on to adding more things. So it's going to be documentation, but it is also going to be reimagining, like going through what the beginner on ramp looks like, and then going through like what the experience is of building certain kinds of things and finding the rough edges and smoothing them out, that kind of thing.
Then there was another question about Ash SQLite. It just asked that it doesn't support aggregates, and that's right. But it's also not, there's still the 3.0 stuff is also missing in Ash SQLite at the moment, right?
Yep. Yeah. Ash SQLite is not updated for 3.0. I was planning on doing that one maybe today or tomorrow. It doesn't support aggregates. It's not necessarily that it can't ever support aggregates, but it doesn't support lateral joining. And so aggregates are more complicated to implement for like a generic SQL engine. And also I would suggest that if you're using SQLite, you can write you can write a calculation that uses a fragment that will like select account or something from a related table. It's not perfect, but like you can do that because SQLite supports subqueries. It's just not like our generic aggregate system was too difficult to port from Postgres to SQLite. So something fresh will have to be figured out for SQLite. I see another question in here about Ash for Gleam, which is actually kind of interesting. I've had some conversations with Louis. I'm so sorry. I've only ever seen his name typed. I have not actually had a conversation with him with our voices. So, but there's some interesting ideas there, but there's a lot of significant roadblocks in the short term for Ash and Gleam to kind of play together. Specifically, Ash really heavily relies on structs, just like Ecto does, and Gleam does not have struct support. So what we'd like to do, this is going to be more like 4.0, 5.0 territory stuff, but the plan is to support dynamically created resources that are backed by like a data structure that is not a struct. So like you could have like a dynamic definition of a resource that lives in an object, or just like a big nested map, or for Gleam's case, one that lives in a record, like the Erlang sort of tuple style record, and that is compatible with Gleam. So eventually, when we aim to support dynamic resources, we can then have a Gleam DSL that produces a big map, and then the resource itself will be backed by a record instead of a struct. And so that is a very long way away, but someday. What else do we got? Yeah, so you've mentioned one of the users here. I'm gonna mangle their name, so I'm just not gonna say it. But is struggling with basic things to learn Ash. I think that is a huge focus of our document that we're going to be pushing for on our documentation, which is we're going to develop like a cookbook, which is real life examples that we try to trim down as much as possible that show like sort of the whole resource involved or all of the bits involved. And the main thing there is we have a lot of reference documentation that explain how every individual thing works, but we don't have a wealth of examples where you can see the things playing together and what choices you might want to make when and that kind of thing. So cookbooks very high up on the priority list. Like as soon as the 3.0 release candidates are out, while those candidates are sort of baking and we're working out any issues with them, I will be working on our documentation, and cookbooks will be a big part of that. Oh yeah, the next question is, do you have any idea for a sort of cookbook in the documentation? Yeah, that's just like I was saying. I definitely think that's going to be the focus of our documentation revamp.
There's also something about example applications, and there's Ash HQ, right? That's open source, and there's also somewhere implementation of the, what's it called again? The real world project. Any plans on upgrading those to the new 3.0 stuff?
You know what, my friend? That is a great idea that I'm going to write down, which is the real world would be a great example project to upgrade.
One of the things that helped me get into Ash, and this was more than a year ago, Zach, was when you did, I forget who, it was a podcast or a screencast where you did an example app, like a Twitter clone or a classic. I can't remember, but I remember watching a screencast of you building something with Ash, and that was impressive and got me kind of hooked and on the trail to learning Ash. I don't know where that example is. I'm sure it's really out of date.
I think it's still on YouTube.
Yeah,
but I think it's Ash 1.0.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe it was like the 2.0 release candidate.
It's from the Live Mastery channel, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's drop a link to that video series in
I put one into the chat.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so I definitely think that kind of thing is super valuable. We're gonna want a similar thing with 3.0, just because I would say like the mentality of things hasn't really changed, or like we haven't changed any fundamental like structural things, but a lot of the like little twiddles and bits have changed, specifically to tend towards the more secure, less ways to accidentally shoot yourself in the foot, that kind of thing. And so yeah, I think that's going to be a big priority when we do our documentation overhaul as well. I've lost our YouTube chat, so let's find it
again. There is a question about extensions. He says that he likes Ash Archival and Ash Paper Trail, and if there are any other plans for new extensions to be added.
That is an interesting question. Sorry, I'm trying to find this. Here we go. Okay. So
Some
the
of
question,
the Ash extensions.
Go ahead.
Some of the Ash extensions like Ash Archival and Ash Paper Trail are actually not that complicated. If you look at the source code, it's pretty obvious how they work. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for people who want to dip their toes into the Ash internals. Before you could actually start with a small extension of just creating something for your own app that you do repeatedly, extract it into an extension, and then you can make it open source. Like Ash Archival, if you look at the source code, it's amazingly simple. So it's a great example of how to create an extension.
Mhm.
Let's take a look. Actually, we can just show the code here. So Ash
By the way,
Archival.
Zach,
Yep.
we're only seeing your Discord screen if you have multiple screens.
Oh, interesting. I wonder. I thought I was like sharing my whole. Well, hold on. It should. Maybe it's just because of the delay, but let me see. The delay makes it hard to tell exactly what I'm showing and what I'm not showing.
I think for the entire screencast, we've only seen the Discord window.
Oh, I thought I was sharing. Okay. Well, never mind. Let's not take a look at the code. I don't want to futz with my live stream after having so many technical issues, so we're just going to leave it. But
Ash CSV is also a pretty good example for a data layer. A really simple example for a data layer. One of my colleagues actually started working on a data layer for HubSpot, and he also looked at Ash CSV for inspiration. That's going pretty well so far.
Very cool. Yeah, we have Ash CubDB is also a good example of a sort of interesting one because it's mapping Ash to a key value store, which has like a couple interesting challenges and things like that. In terms of examples with authentication policies and users with roles, absolutely. I think that's one of the harder things. And somebody in one of the Alembians, somebody that works with me at Alembic, actually put forth made an interesting point about what can make working with policies complicated, which is it's not actually an authorization system. Like it doesn't put forward any specific authorization patterns like role-based access control or, ACL or any other type of thing. It's more like a tool set to build your own. So like if you want to use, role-based, or if you want to use something else, or just sort of data-based policies, like, the owner of this thing can read it. And that can make it difficult sometimes to get started because you don't always know exactly where to go. But there's extensions like it's your extension, right, Barnabas? Yeah, there's an Ash RBAC. Yeah. And that's a really good example of a package. Also a pretty small package, all things considered, that it builds policies and field policies for you, and gives you like a specific authorization pattern. So that sort of thing, I think, is a good example of what you can do with extensions, and how Ash is like not necessarily meant to give you all these big patterns right out the gate. Like it's a toolkit that sometimes extensions are needed to really leverage.
I think another thing that is also coming with 3.0 is like more work on generators.
Yes. So in a lot of ways, sometimes we're perfectionists, and we do have plans for generators. Ultimately, the reason generators haven't happened yet, I think this is worth talking about, which is, like, people have asked for generators forever, and we do actually have one generator in Ash Phoenix, or two generators that will generate a live view and or a like a not a dead view, I guess. I don't think Chris McCord likes that word, but I forget. Anyway, it'll generate a live view and a regular view or something from your resource. But the main thing that we want is we want for when you generate a resource, for you to be able to ask for extensions to include some basic setup. And we don't want one generator that has to know about all of the important extensions. We want the extensions to be able to pitch in and have like what it means, so like when you use Ash GraphQL, you say generate resource, you can say like dash dash with Ash GraphQL, and it will add the appropriate configuration to the resource. And so to get it right, it's just a little bit more of an interesting project. But with that said, I also have some issues with generators in the first place, which is in a lot of ways, Ash, it's like if there's a certain amount of things that you can type that will generate the code that you want. I want to make a tool, like that's the point of Ash in a way, is you type only that bit, and then you don't need to generate the rest of the code to do stuff with like generating code from from something like that is building like a one-time projection from a command. So you say, give me a resource with X, Y, and Z attributes, right? And then it's like, maybe we should just make the resource syntax, concise enough that that's all you have to say in the first place, and then you don't need the generators. So it's one of those things of like, I think that it's a slippery slope with generators. When you start going down that path, you think, oh, instead of making our language concise enough to say what we're trying to say, we'll just put this really complicated bit of stuff into the generators and then make it the user's problem to figure out, and to make it their tech debt instead of our tech debt. And so I'm very cognizant of that like, I don't want to just lean into generators, and it's a kind of a dangerous, it can be dangerous if used wrong, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. But there are already generators for live view. I was actually more talking about live view generators.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, check out the live view generators. They're useful. And that's kind of an example of one where that's out of our control, and so where I'm comfortable, I was comfortable just writing a regular old script that makes a live view, because I can't decide how verbose live view is or isn't. Ash doesn't have a front end thing yet. And so yeah, that one's a little bit easier to justify, I think. Yeah, that's a great point. One of the users in our in the chat says, I think for me the DSL is already the generator. And yeah, that's my same sort of thought.
I mean, it's kind of true. It's generating code during compile time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the data, not that much code.
Another way that you could think of a generator is being another type of guide. So we could create a generator that gives you kind of a scaffold with a lot of stuff commented out or comments. So it's almost like creating an interactive guide. So we'll generate a resource for you, and maybe we'll auto-generate some attributes in there because those are most common. But then I think you can have commented out sections of Ash Postgres policies, the most common bits that people might want, and treat it more as a guide on how to create a generator than I think something that's like, you're going to type a long command and we're going to automatically make a finished resource for you.
Yeah.
You could approach it a different way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. I originally was like very, like when we first started on Ash, I was like, no generators. And I've turned the corner on that. I don't mind. I think it makes sense. We're going to have generators. If only because people get comparative and they're like, oh, Ash doesn't have generators, and they're not going to look a lot deeper than that because they're just used to having something. And I think at a minimum, mix ash.new has to happen also, because setting up an Ash project or an Ash Postgres, like setting up the packages themselves can come with a little bit of complexity, like setting up Ash authentication, right? There's a default setup there that you do actually need to write a fair amount of code. And I think if we can say mix ash.new with Ash authentication and have it create your user and token models and give you like a good config, that gets us halfway there.
Yeah.
So somebody in the chat says interested in the core features maturity stage and what it thereby lets Ash users achieve. I assume it reached some significant stage so that it now makes sense to focus on DX. Yeah. So the major significant shift is two things. It's what we call atomics and bulk actions. And so this was something that I've needed to close the loop on for a very long time for Ash core to really be, I think, I mean, not that it might not ever really be complete, but for it to cover enough of the bases. And so that support for that is done, or at least the initial, first version of it is done. And what it allows basically is to take our resource actions. It gives you tools to make them atomic, which means like they don't have to like read a record before they update it, and it makes them concurrency safe and that kind of thing. It's a very complex problem space of how that actually works in a generic tool like Ash, because users can attach custom functions and we have to be able to do things like tell them, hey, I can't do that function atomically, because in order for an action to be atomic, all of the work has to happen in the data layer, right? And for bulk actions as well, like we very often had these extensions had a need to be able to do things. Here's a good example. In Ash authentication, there's it comes with a gen server that can prune tokens that have, that are like authentication tokens. If you are using the thing to store tokens, you may want to prune old ones after a period of time or something like that. And without having bulk actions in Ash core, how does Ash authentication say every 5 minutes, using a gen server, delete all inactive tokens that are older than 5 minutes or something like that? And it can't. So we have to generalize, in addition to the basic sort of CRUD actions, we have to generalize, okay, we have a destroy, but we want to destroy 10 things. And that has to be better than loop over all 10 things and destroy them. Like, that's unacceptable. And so Ash actually acts as this sort of, with bulk operations, it acts as a sort of glue, which is actually, I think, super fascinating, which is, let's say you want to store, this is a common thing, users will store tokens in a different data store than their main data store for whatever reason. They'll store it in Amnesia or ETS using one of those data layers. And Ash authentication can still say bulk destroy all of the inactive things. And Ash, if it's using Postgres, Ash will say, okay, delete where, right? And if it's using ETS, then we'll look up and delete each one in turn. And I think that's really powerful because it allows extensions to be written that can generalize, like, do this action across these group of resources. And Ash will choose the best option that it can. And that gives you this sort of really huge, not collaboration, but cool. How do you when you make two things work together? Compatibility. Yeah, compatibility. Ash acts as this big compatibility layer between the various parts of your system, and like automatically upgrading things to better behavior where it can. So that's in now, and that's the major shift that allows, I think, 3.0 to happen and for us to move to developer experience. Do we have any other questions?
Not really. I mean, so I don't know if you can't see the Discord, but there was another thing about policies, but I think you pretty much said that already, that it's lower level and it doesn't give you all the patterns up front. You have to build on top of that.
Yep. Cool. Well, we've still got, I think we're probably going to go for another 25 minutes or so. So, if people have questions, bring them in. I'm happy to vamp if we want to talk about 3.0, and we can talk about the teasers if anybody has questions about 3.0 teasers or what's coming.
Do you want to tease your training at ElixirCon?
Yes, I do. Thank you for reminding me. I feel like, when like it's like one of those celebrities, they go on like Hot Ones or something and they like forget to vamp their or not vamp, to pitch their thing like, oh, I have a movie coming up. It's like that for me. Um, yeah, so we have a training coming up at ElixirConf, ElixirConf EU, which I will drop down a link. Um, it's going to Ash 3.0 will be hot off the press, and this training will be updated for 3.0. So we'll be using the 3.0 release candidates. You'll get one of the first previews of 3.0, and yeah, I'm really excited. We've learned a lot from the first training that we did at ElixirConf US. This one's going to be a lot more interactive. It's going to have a lot more of a focus on sort of less like us just delivering content and more, get your hands on the keyboard, actually sort of building things. And the real trick there is we're building a smaller thing so that there's more time for people to experiment and play around with, and less time for us to, and that way we don't have to use all the time to say, okay, now do X, do all these different things. So I think it's going to be a really good training. I'm excited about it. So ElixirConf EU, that's I think it's on the 16th or the 17th of April is our training. And yeah, I'd love to see everybody there.
And we got a new question in the Discord. Any future plans for GUI for editing resources?
Well, any future plans? I mean, the answer to that question is yes, but like, how tangible is it? Is a ways out. It is important. Like, there's a reason that Spark is as sort of structured. The DSL builder under the hood is structured as structured as it is and as specified as it is to support this kind of thing. Or at least that's an angle that we're taking. And in the future, I do intend for that kind of thing to exist. If it's me that builds it or if it's somebody else that builds it, it's hard to say. But it's just it's one of those things of like, there's a million different things to focus on, and if/when that becomes the smart thing to focus on is an interesting question, because it's just one of those things. How much value does the GUI add if it's just editing text files and you can edit the text files yourself? In my experience, no code platforms, no code tooling can be helpful, but like what I would suggest is more helpful is actually a GUI for displaying information about your Ash application than necessarily for interactively editing your Ash application. And I think maybe we would start there, which is like an Ash browser that allows you to sort of browse what's going on in your application, click around in interesting ways, maybe see like a graph of all of your related resources and click between them, and maybe load it up. And this is kind of Ash admin future ideals, load it up and get like a little table view of it, and all that sort of stuff, which will help with business users and different things like that to have an understanding of your application. And then probably from there, we would extend it to potentially supporting editing.
Next question. Support for Reactor for wizard-like UIs in Ash Phoenix.
Wizard-like UIs in Ash Phoenix. Yeah, we had some plans a long time ago to build a thing called Flowform or something, ashphoenix.flowform, which was going to use ash.flow, and it was going to build a form for you. And if the form halted, or if the flow halted, then you could look at that and figure out a transition from, okay, the original version or what page I'm looking at now to the sort of next one. However, ash.flow has been sort of deprecated, and we're working on ash.reactor now. No, ash.flow is still supported. It will still get bug fixes for the foreseeable future, but it got moved into its own package, and we're not going to be adding anything to it. This is a good thing, because ash.reactor, just reactor itself is its own tool in its own right. And so we can start talking about, well, how do we build a wizard on top, like a wizard experience or a data structure for a sort of wizard type experience on top of Reactor. And that can be potentially something that lives in its own package or lives with Reactor. And at that point, you may or may not need something special from Ash to do that. Like maybe there's reactor.wizard form or something, and it will sort of handle all of the bits that you need. So we're exploring that, but it's going to be a while. And what I will say is that what I've seen people do, and this is an interesting concept, is they've actually built resources using without a data layer. And they model each step of their form as a single resource that just has the attributes and validations for each step of the form. And then once they get to the end, they have something that sort of translates that all to submit to an action. And that's a reasonable way to do it right now, but unfortunately, nothing's going to help you that much.
Then we have another question. When 3.0 comes around, is there a way to get one of you to help advise on migrating a big code base over from PHP? Would be a paid thing or collaboration to create free video courses for Ash from scratch? That's probably a plug for Alembic, right?
Yeah, that's a great, wow. It's like I set that up, but I didn't, I promise. Yeah, so Alembic we're sort of venturing into a very interesting space, and I think it's pretty exciting. Which is a kind of a different model for supporting, users who are using Ash that want maybe a little bit more attention, that kind of thing. And I need to find the link. Give me a second to find the link. But we do have essentially an Ash premium support model, which again, it's kind of important to keep the distinction here, which is this isn't an Ash program. This is an Alembic program, but Alembic employs, the majority of Ash experts that are out there. And so this is part of how we're, of how we want to sort of add a little bit of a more in-depth and intense level of support. But I need to find the link that I will drop in to the chat. Where is it? 2024. Here we go. So I will drop this in the YouTube chat. There is an initiative for, if I can, why isn't this working? Here we go. Got it. That URL is a bit weird, but I pulled it out. I think we're just getting started with this whole thing, and we have essentially one customer that's been taking advantage of it, and it's actually going surprisingly well. And we're thinking that it's a very mutually beneficial model for certain folks that want a little bit more attention. So, yeah, that's a good question, and yeah, there is options out there.
A while before this, there was also a question, would looking at these smaller extensions also be a good way to learn the basic of Spark? Probably too, because there's not a lot of documentation in Spark at the moment.
Yes, that is absolutely a useful thing, and that's kind of the only way to learn how Spark works at the moment. I've been wanting to document it more for like a year, but it's just one of those things that, only so many hours in the day. So yeah, I would say looking at those small extensions is a great way to learn Spark. There's also some other projects out there built with Spark, like Channel Handler is a good example, and there's a couple other ones. So I think James Harton actually is working on I don't know if it's released or public yet, but a reverse proxy for Elixir that uses a Spark DSL to configure the proxy. And so there's other projects you can look at as well, and that might be helpful because those other projects, none of them are even, I think, remotely as complex as Ash is, and so it can help you kind of cut through some of the noise of all of the different things that we're doing with Ash or Ash extensions or all the different compatibility things that we do, and to see a simpler project.
Then there's another question in the Discord. I built my own S3 object resource with action upload destroy using hooks. I think it's important. It's an important part to cover in tutorials, maybe in version 3. So file uploads probably coming in the tutorials, right, or in the cookbook.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I think it makes sense to talk about that kind of thing. And if you would like to share that, maybe we can kind of use that as a basis for a cookbook. The other thing I would like, I think we really need Ash file upload, which is like our sort of our answer for supporting file uploads as inputs to actions. So you can say basically like, you know, I need, you know, if you have like a import action, it can say like the contents, and you can say like it's a file that is of, you know, has the following extensions, and then the Ash Phoenix and Ash whatever will handle, you know, getting like it'll be a file input in the form, and all these kinds of things, right? So I think there's a lot of things you have to do to get file uploading right, and I would really like for Ash to have its own answer to that is flexible, kind of like what you might have seen. I think Waffle is a good example of one for Ecto, and I think that's a big opportunity there. That's, you know, somebody was asking about adding additional, you know, helper extensions, and I think Ash file upload is a good example of one like that. I mean, theoretically it could be in Core, but probably not, because file upload also comes with like file upload adapters of like to S3 and to whatever third party thing and all this sort of stuff. So probably not going to be in Core, but I think will be pretty important.
Then another question. I think you've said a couple of times that most projects end up using a couple of custom extensions. Do you have examples, or wouldn't mind adding some examples to the new docs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say honestly, Ash Archival is an extension of that, right? It is an example of one of those custom extensions. It's just when I write a custom extension, I typically make it open source instead of, but that's what Ash Archival originally was. Is like I needed to be able to mix in soft delete into my resources, and of course I'm going to put it in our public repo. So, I mean, with that said, there are some examples of custom extensions that we've written, you know, with some of our clients, that sort of thing. Like we had one that was, I mean, the problem is like, they're not open source. If they were, they wouldn't be custom extensions. They would just be, you know, core extensions, or you know what I mean? So like, it's kind of a hard thing to find there. But we had one that, you know, whose job was to sort of cache calculated values until they were requested to be recalculated, that kind of thing. So custom extensions are really powerful, but honestly, there's no difference between a custom extension and one of the extensions we provide. They're like, we don't use any special hooks to do it. It's just we support it is all.
I think there's like a small example guide in the docs on how to create extensions. That's probably something that could also be extended a bit.
Yep. Yeah, building larger repos. I mean, it's an interesting problem that we've found. I had this idea of, you know, that Ash HQ would be this that Ash HQ would be this like, oh, we'll use all of the extensions, but ultimately it's like we couldn't find a good reason to use all of the extensions. Like, you know, it's just one of those things of like Ash is huge. It covers so many grounds that no one project would ever need to use all of it, and it just kind of makes it difficult to show, oh well, here's the Ash example that has everything in it, because everybody is using it differently. And like a great example of that is some people are using just Ash, a data layer, and live view. They don't use any of the other things, and other people are using Ash Phoenix, Ash GraphQL, multiple data layers, and some of the utility extensions like, you know, Papertrail and version and Archival. So it's just, there's no one size fits all there.
And that could be potentially a repo for the cookbook that has all the extensions installed and just code examples with all the different extensions.
Yeah. Like that. Yeah, that's very cool. Good idea.
Could also be used for tests and stuff. Sometimes it's not that easy to boil it down to just one library or anything. So it's something that like a couple of libraries came together, and that would also be a nice place to be able to add tests.
Yes, I mean that's actually a good example of it. It's an interesting thing because we can't really test atomics in Core alone because because Ash ETS doesn't really support atomics, and like I've considered making it support atomics, but because it kind of fakes it for a lot of things because you know ETS is an in-memory store, but but I think that, so yeah, most of the tests for atomics, like the real tests for bulk actions, live in Ash Postgres, because that's the thing that really leverages atomics and that sort of thing. So we do have a CI step that runs all of our core sub projects tests alongside, or when we run CI. So at least that's why it's typically okay for it to be like that. So all right, do we have any other questions that we know of?
Someone is still writing in Discord.
Okay.
So, okay, there it is. A long time ago in a podcast, you talked about ideas for testing and generating constraints from TEF. If you remember, could you talk about this and plans?
Yeah, I actually would still really like to do this. And okay, sorry. We have done some of that, which is we have, for Ash types, they can emit a generator which uses stream data, and then you can ask Ash, I think it's an ash.generator, for like a stream of valid inputs to an action, and so you can property test your actions. Mm-hmm. That's all built into Ash core directly. You don't need any external dependencies for that. What I've wanted to do for a long time is to build a policy testing harness where it takes your policies and it compiles them into a list of all the combinations of facts, and then gives you a hook to add like a test for that combination of facts, and then it will tell you like that was supposed to return forbidden, and it will set up all the data for you. It's like, here's an actor where that that should and shouldn't pass, essentially, and here's the data setup where that should and shouldn't pass. And I think that could be super powerful because it basically gives you 100% test coverage of your policies at all times. It's just we probably won't be able to get to the magical mystical version of it that I just discussed, but I do think that we could get close. And it's just one of those things of, again, it's like, it's not that hard to write your own tests for your policies, and so it just hasn't been focused on, unfortunately. We have a question. Would you recommend stream data over Proper for property-based testing? Honestly, I haven't used Proper. I've only used stream data, and stream data was the one that, when I was doing the investigation, that seemed the easiest to implement on as like a type by type generator. I don't know if I looked at Proper or not at the time, but I would recommend using stream data for if you're using Ash, just because we have support for it. But I don't have anything against Proper. Okay. Any chance part of the training could be recorded and later shared? Unfortunately, it will not be the case. So it's a paid training on, that people are paying for access to at ElixirConf, and they don't record the trainings. That's not to say that we aren't interested in potentially offering either some kind of, we could do a much cheaper paid online course, or we could do, we're interested in spreading that knowledge around more. We don't want it to be locked down and behind a paywall or anything like that. It's just, that's the program that they put on for ElixirConf training.
There was also another question about are there best practices to use an external API as a data source other than Ash JSON API Wrapper, for example?
I mean, the best practices are typically general or generic actions or manual actions. And we have a lot of cases, that's often I will do that, right? Like writing a data layer can be a pretty complicated task. And the only reason I would write a data layer is when I imagine like different kinds of resources with different shapes, being backed by the same generic data store. But if I was just saying I wanted to write GitHub tickets that would like get the tickets from the GitHub, or GitHub issues, I mean, that would, list issues from a GitHub project when you read it and would create a GitHub issue when you create it, I would write those as manual actions. The manual read action would just use like rec to read the stuff from the API and return the results, and then it would use rec, to create an issue in a manual create action. And then the nice thing about that is if you do that and you model it with Ash and manual actions, you can put the issues list in your GraphQL API or something if you want. It's trivial. So there's still a lot of benefit to doing it with Ash and manual actions, but it is also much simpler than trying to do it with a data layer.
Follow up on that one. If you do it as manual actions, what would be the configured data layer? Because I also did it with I think it's a simple data layer that you also mentioned in the chat, and then just did it before action hook and got the data from the API, and then did simple data layer dot add data or whatever it is called, and then use the normal actions that way.
Yeah, honestly, they're almost equivalent. The only reason I tend to use manual actions, I mean, actually, there's probably no reason to pick one versus the other aside from manual actions give you like a more specific API, I guess. Like when you look and you see like manual and you have to see a module, you're like, okay, this action is implemented in a different module, and you know that you're looking at the implementation of it. But if you see like a before action hook, it's not always immediately obvious that that's like the implementation of the action using set data, but mechanically they're almost exactly the same.
Yeah. Like one benefit that we had is that we could just let the simple data layer do the filtering. Because we couldn't filter it beforehand, so we added all the data into the simple data layer and let Ash filter the results.
Yeah, so like if you let the data layer be the default, it will still be the simple data layer and use. Oh no, you're right. If you do a manual action, you won't get the filtering, will you? Yeah. So it is better. No, you're right. It is. We should figure that out. I mean, I'm going to look into that because I actually think there's probably some utilities we can do where you can write a manual action and then say like, okay, apply this filter. But yeah, using the simple data layer and using ash.data layer.simple.set data actually would be better for a lot of cases. Here, let me explain when it wouldn't be better. If the data layer, for example, supports some amount of filtering where you have to you want to extract some filters from the query filter, or if it supports some amount of sorting where you want to take certain, allow sorting on certain attributes, then you'd want to use a manual action because you're going to take those out. You don't want the simple data layer to be applying it to your app. And so I think that's kind of the thing. If you just have a simple list that you're going to get from somewhere else and you want the simple data layer to take care of it, then you would use ash.datalayer.simple.set data. But if you're going to manipulate the query in some way or extract things out of it, then a manual action is better. Okay, is there already documentation for 3.0? I mean, there is, most of it's documented. There's also an upgrading guide in 3.0. No, again, keep in mind, we are not at the phase quite yet where I will help you if you have issues upgrading. We want most of the packages to be done before we do that, and I will make an announcement, and after that then we're going to help everybody upgrade and support that process. But for now, you're mostly on your own if you're going to try to upgrade. However, there is a guide that is quite in-depth. It's got a lot of bits in it. It's a long guide that tells you all the things that you need to change. I will link it here. All the things that you're going to need to know to update your application from 2.0 to 3.0. So it goes through what's changed in the DSLs, what's changed in the what functions and modules have changed, and then the breaking changes that you might potentially have to deal with. Otherwise, if you don't have an existing application, you're not upgrading, then the documentation in the 3.0 branch is effectively up to date. We modify the documentation as we went, but there are new guides that will need to be. We want to write new guides for atomics and bulk actions and stuff, but it's not going to be wrong, I guess, is the main thing. It just might not be as full as it will be in a month from now. Okay.
No more questions at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is going strong. There's a lot of people asking questions, but we want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So, I think we've gone for an hour. That's pretty much our goal. So I think we can wrap it up here. One more plug for the Ash training in ElixirConf EU. It's going to be a really good training. I think we've nailed down a lot of the kinks, and I think I'm really excited about it. And we also have a training coming up at Gig City Elixir in Chattanooga. We're going to do another training there. Yeah, get hyped. Release candidates are coming soon. 3.0's right around the corner. Barnabas or Robert, if you guys have anything you want to plug, like your companies or something else, feel free to say something.
I'm also giving a
Plug.
talk at the ElixirConf. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
So I'll be
absolutely.
there. Yeah, would be nice to see some of you guys. Looking forward to it.
Yep.
Excellent. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
And Robert, you also wanted to say?
No, I've got nothing to plug yet. I'm
Okay.
still working on it.
Yeah.
Excited to see where that
Great.
goes. Very excited. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you all next month for Ash Office Hours. It'll be post 3.0, so that's very exciting. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.